Hey everybody, and welcome back to the ski resort. I originally wanted to start this video out with some schlager music, so I downloaded some DJ Ötzi and Fliegerlied and all of that stuff, but eventually I was too much of a pussy to actually do that. I don't want to play with the YouTube copyright system, so I'm going with some non-copyright, sort of traditional Tyrolean folk music in the background of this video instead. Which I guess will do in its place, but it's a bit sad that we live in a society where I can't just play copyrighted terrible dance music out loud on my YouTube videos about Planet Coaster. Anyway, I figured it would be thematically consistent because in today's episode I'll be working on an après-ski bar. Now I'll mostly be focusing on this right here, which is an umbrella bar, but I'll also build a proper restaurant building next to it to actually establish the atmosphere of what one of these establishments would have. Now I have to say right in advance that I'm not actually that much of an expert on this kind of thing, and I know that I've said that I've skied a lot in my life, but pretty much every time that I've been skiing was just with my parents, and we've only ever been to Austria, and you know, it's nice to travel with your parents, but I wouldn't see myself dancing on tables hammered and smashed in an après-ski bar, shotting flugels and singing the Hermes House Band with my parents. So we never really did any of that kind of thing. My only après-ski partying experience is actually from the Netherlands. Rotterdam has this funny après-ski bar actually. But yeah, that's about it. Aside from that, my only skiing experience is in Japan, and while curry and ramen for lunch is awesome, it doesn't quite have the same après-ski atmosphere that European ski resorts have, and that I figured would be, you know, very important to feature in this ski resort, since it would be supposedly somewhere in Europe. So yeah, we're building this, and what exactly are we building? Well, first off, the umbrella bar, which is probably the most recognizable structure of an après-ski establishment that you can ever have. It's just the kind of architecture that screams terrible music and drunk people. And I think it's very effective at doing that, but it's mostly effective at being a great temporary structure, because in reality it's just a circle of simple walls, in this case some simple glass walls, with in the middle a giant umbrella that you can open and just about cover the walls on the sides to make a sort of makeshift tent, and then put some space heaters in it and a whole lot of alcohol, and you pretty much have a party going. So I figured it would be very important to get one of these iconic little structures on at least somewhere of the mountain here. Sometimes you'll find these actually halfway down a mountain, which I always kind of question, because you know that people get drunk in these things, and I wouldn't want to like ski downhill after a couple beers. But then again, I'm sure that most of the time it's fine anyway, but I decided to not encourage drunk skiing and put this thing all the way down at the bottom of the hill, down where the lifts are. And hopefully that will prevent some peep casualties in the future. Now that's pretty much it for the umbrella bar. It's a very simple structure. I will add some, well, minor detailing inside, although I have to say it's not going to be much more than just a few stools and beer bottles, just because I can't really come up with anything else to really add in it. It'll always feel like something's missing, because in reality it won't really look realistic until there's way too many people inside. But that's something that realistically will be very hard to do in Planet Coaster, so it's just gonna have to look a bit empty and deserted. So I decided to start working on the actual restaurant building, which this umbrella bar would probably belong to. And this is going to be quite a simple, kind of Bavarian, Tyrolean kind of building. A little bit modeled after the farmhouses actually, but then in a way that it could be, you know, remodeled after that. It's not exactly looking like a farmhouse, and in the front it'll have a lot of glass and a terrace to really signify that this is, at the end of the day, a place where you can eat and drink, basically. So yeah, starting off with that iconic overhanging roof. Houses from this area always have very large overhanging roofs with large wooden beams to support it underneath it, so I figured that's just about the most important details to get in place to make this a recognizable structure. And underneath all of that is usually also a wide balcony with a lot of window boxes with flowers in them, so that's something that I didn't want to miss out on either, so building a quick balcony here. The wooden floor pieces is actually, well, custom content from the Steam Workshop, and I'm sorry, but I can't remember exactly what it was called, but just in case anybody wants to look it up, it's as a wooden floor piece somewhere on the Steam Workshop. It's not actually in the game itself, so that's something to keep in mind. But the rest of this will pretty much all be in-game. So here I'm adding the large glass facade to kind of make very clear that at the end of the day, even though this building looks kind of traditional, it's still probably very modern and has a kind of modern interior and a very large front facade behind which the actual restaurant would probably be. I should also add that I'm not going to add interiors, at least not in this episode. It's something that I couldn't really fit in into an already quite long episode, but maybe that's something that I might add at the end of the series, just kind of do it for all the buildings at once. We'll see if there's any popular support for it. I also have to say that I really suck at interiors, so that's part of the reason why I'm always avoiding it. So I know that's a bit of a weakness that I need to get over one day, but for now I'm just focusing on the exteriors, basically. And yeah, on the second floor I'm also adding a lot of glass. All looks very fancy, so you can see that it's kind of a modern-ish building in the husk of a traditional building, and all of you haters of facadism can start insulting me for this, but I kind of dig the look of this, and at least in some of the larger ski resorts you'll see this a lot. Some architecture that looks very traditional and uses very traditional elements, but at the same time is larger and much more modern and refurbished just to handle all of the giant crowds and make everything a bit more functional as well. So I'm adding a wing to the side here, which is theoretically where a lot of tables would be. I have to say this is going to be kind of a small building for a restaurant, so definitely going to be a bit crammed in there. But then again, that's also part of the real skiing experience. Stepping into a restaurant and everything is damp and musky and wet, and it's all messy and chaotic. That's part of the fun. I feel like without that, you're not getting the real European skiing experience. So I only see this as something positive, I suppose. Yeah, and on the side here, it's not really going to be too interesting. Otherwise, again, bringing back the very much overhanging roofs. I'm not actually detailing the roofs in a way that I sometimes do with all of the separate wooden corbels, making for separate pieces of the shingles, just because I'm going to cover this with snow in the end. Because realistically the trees are covered with snow, so some of the buildings should have at least a thin layer of snow on them as well. So you won't actually see too much of the roof, but just for the parts of the roof where there's no snow, I'm adding the roof pieces anyway. I feel like if you're building snowy roofs and you're just putting down snow instead of the roofs underneath it, there's just something's wrong with you, but maybe that's just me. I also like to add actual frameworks for buildings very often, even if you don't see much of the framework in the end. Though I didn't do that for this building. Maybe I should at some point. I'll think about that. Anyway, on the other side, I'm also adding a small wing on the side, just to make this building a bit more interesting and balanced. And at the end of the day, I feel like it already kind of looks like the shape of a restaurant building. And I'm bringing it over here to the umbrella bar, just because I wanted to build this thing in a perfect grid position. The 3D gizmo is still being very weird in this game, and I am so glad that for Planet Zoo it appears to be fixed, because it's just impossible to move stuff around properly with the 3D gizmo sometimes. So I like to build buildings on a perfectly parallel grid to the actual park borders, so that I can use the global 3D gizmo instead of the object-based one, and then rotate my buildings as I want to put them in a specific place. I think that helps out sometimes, but in general it is nicer to know exactly how you're building stuff, so yeah, I can't wait for Planet Zoo to actually have a functional 3D gizmo. I still like the 3D gizmo, it's an awesome part of the game, but god is it still broken. Anyway, finally I'm adding all of the foliage on the front with those, well, I'm calling them window boxes, but I guess they're more like balcony boxes, which still have some flowers in it. It's winter, so that's a bit over the top, but still, you can't really get rid of those flowers, and I wanted to have these boxes anyway, and I think it looks quite good, so I'm adding this. even if it's a lot of effort in the winter time. And just as small decorations, some planters and lanterns alongside the umbrella bar as well, because that probably deserves some detailing as well. And finally, I'm adding some awnings on the side. You can see me messing with the sun position for a while there, just to try and get the lighting right. Just because those awnings were looking a bit strange in certain lighting conditions, but I think it looks fine like this right now. And yeah, finally building a terrace right in front of the building where the entire terrace with all of the tables is going to be. And I'm using tables which I believe Ruby recommended to me, but I'm not entirely sure. If this is a shout out to the wrong person, I'm sorry. But anyway, after the last Jägerhorn episode, or actually not the last, but the one where I built the beer garden, somebody recommended that I use the actual beer garden tables, because in that episode I was kind of using just the picnic tables in game as a substitute for them, but it turns out that somebody made actual beer garden like folding tables on the Steam Workshop. So I downloaded those and I'm going to use them for this build because, well, realistically you'll always have these kinds of tables on terraces in ski resorts because you can easily fold them and pack them up when season's over or anything like that. So it's very practical. You always see these all over ski resorts, so gotta have these tables. I'm adding some custom snow actually on the terrace itself before I'm adding the tables in though, just because, well, realistically snow would fall there, and for some reason I didn't want to just terraform over it, so if it looks a bit strange, that's why I ended up doing that in the end. But yeah, here are the tables finally. And the way that I ended up doing this is just putting them in straight at first and then kind of shuffling them around, grabbing each of the tables every now and then, moving them to different heights and positions and rotations, just to make it look like in real life when these things kind of move around a little bit and people are shifting those benches and tables as they're starting to sit down. These things are kind of annoying, I always find, and they're a bit weird to maneuver around, but they're pretty much the most practical thing for this kind of situation. So yeah, what works, I suppose. And that is pretty much the small beer garden here. Now I also downloaded some Coca-Cola bottles and some beer bottles. Couldn't find much else, so there are only two things on the menu of this restaurant, I'm afraid. And there are only two things ever on any of these tables. But at least I figured it would be better than putting nothing on them. At least it's a bit of detailing. So I decided to go with that, although it would have been really cool to put some giant beer glasses on the tables like you'll see in Bavaria, for instance. Oh, and there's one thing that I didn't add to the building that I really felt I should have added, which is just a dormer. I just can't go build a building without adding a dormer at least somewhere. I don't know why, I just always end up doing this. And adding that in was also a good reminder to add some more support beams for those giant overhanging roofs. So there you go. I also really like the little spire pieces, and I'm sorry I don't remember exactly who made these, but I think they're actually on the Steam Workshop as well under the name Spire, which I put just on the edges of those roof gables, which just add a little nice touch to these gables. You wouldn't really see this in a ski resort in real life, but you know, this is Planet Coaster. I can detail as much as I want, and I felt it would be a nice addition to these buildings. And finally, I put a cheesy year on the front of the building, as if this building were really from 1954, I think I wrote on it. I'm not entirely sure, it's really hard to tell. I'm watching from a very small preview. But yeah, it's probably quite an old restaurant. I mean, sometimes you do really find really old restaurants in certain ski resorts. We've been skiing for quite a while here, honestly. Skiing in general is something that's really old, and it's an interesting conversation because it's one of these things that kind of started appearing all over the world, I think. There are a lot of claims that skiing came from Scandinavia or from the Alps, but in reality I think it's probably from just about everywhere, and apparently the oldest claims of the invention of skiing are actually from China from thousands of years ago, where it used to be a hunting practice. And in general, it's interesting how skiing is one of those sports that is really based on hunting, since in a snowy environment it is really the best way to get around. Even on flat ground or just slightly hilly ground, it's much more efficient than walking around in deep snow. So yeah, that's not quite an accurate history, not quite a very detailed history, but just as far as I remember the history of skiing, it is really, really old, and it's been done all over the world for a really long time. It's just that only in the recent century it's become a sport on the scale that we know today, which I think is particularly caused by the invention of ski lifts and easier ways to move around, and the fact that people have gotten rich enough to afford free time and to afford skiing. At least some people, because at the end of the day skiing is still something that really only middle class people or richer can afford, and it's still very expensive, and it's getting more expensive, and it's getting more difficult because climate change and all that. So yeah, it's not something that everybody can participate in for sure. At least everybody can build ski resorts in Planet Coaster, I suppose, if that's any consolidation. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic, so I'm adding the back of the building here. And I put a tweet out where I said that this has been one of these buildings where I accidentally made the back look better than the front. Which is a bit of a controversial statement maybe. Maybe you don't agree with that, but definitely when I built the back I tried to keep it less detailed than the front and a bit more simple. But at the end of the day I thought it looked better than the front, especially with the mountains in the back. So yeah, here goes my favorite part of this build actually. The back is kept much more simple and traditional, and mostly just had windows in places where I felt it would make sense for the restaurant inside, and then it has kind of the back door on the sides where I suppose you could supply stuff or whatever. There might be a road on the back or something like that. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to work all of that out, but what I do know is that I feel like from the back it's a slightly better building, just a slightly better composition, a bit less over the top with all of those glass facades, and it just looks a bit more rustic, I feel. But I guess you can be the judge of that after the cinematic shots at the end of the video as well. Now, it's finally time to add details inside the umbrella bar. All this time there's been snow inside, which kind of doesn't make that much sense, so I'm adding an actual floor in now. And the way that I was doing this is, oops, this looks like a bit of weird imagery, forget about that. Anyway, the way that I did this is rotating some wooden floors twice actually, and the second time kind of sinking them just below the other ones to avoid having Z-fighting. The rotation trick to make domes and round shapes and things like that is really neat, but you always have to watch out with Z-fighting, because if you have too many textures that are exactly at the same height, everything just starts looking like a mess, so that's why I ended up doing it like that. And then I'm building a very simple bar in the middle, but there really isn't much to this. I probably could have added some crates or whatever if they existed, but I'm just detailing this to the minimum extent that I would have to make this look believable from the outside. It's not really per se meant to be seen from inside, but I think with all of these stools, the custom little stools by the way, which are literally just a wooden post and an art piece, and also the tables and some of the bottles and the basic bar, it generally looks quite believable from the outside, I feel. So that's basically why I did that. Now I did forget one thing, and I was already almost going to record this commentary at this point, but then I realized that I didn't have any skis or other equipment outside of these buildings, and that really doesn't make sense, because if you're going here, then you'll probably be arriving with skis or a snowboard or whatever other equipment you use to go down the mountain, and you want to leave them somewhere. So you'll often find racks of skis and snowboards just outside these things. I couldn't find any snowboard racks, so pretty much everybody here is skiing. But yeah, that's something that realistically I really had to add to these buildings, because it's such an iconic part of these buildings as well. The fact that they're just kind of placed in a sea of skis everywhere. And the slightly annoying thing about this was that I did want it to look realistic enough in terms of colors, so I went and individually gave all of these skis a color. It's a bit random, but yeah, at least they almost all have a unique color. So that's a neat little detail there that I spent too much time on. But I think in the end, if you look at the whole thing and you just see all of these weird colors everywhere, it just looks a bit more realistic than seeing all kinds of skis with the same color patterns. And I'm also putting some helmets and stuff outside. Not sure who would leave their helmet outside, but I guess it's something you could do. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.